So that now the perception is that code issues such as abandoned cars, unsafe houses, that sort of thing, aren't being dealt with or aren't being dealt with correctly. And so ask each of you what you would do as a county council member to try and correct that problem.
Well, we're working on the front lines for over a decade involving issues related to code enforcement and enforcing them. I know firsthand that the legislation that is written sometimes by maybe well-intentioned politicians, once you have to go to implement it, it's not easy to do. And that's one of the things I pride myself on, is that I have seen careless legislation passed that impacts people's lives, that puts people out of business and affects them in deep ways. In the taxi cab industry, for example, since I see many great supporters out here today, I'll give you an example where decisions were made around the legislation and people lost their jobs and their livelihoods for just one ticket. Just one ticket last summer while I was on maternity leave. Drivers had to go home to East Africa because they couldn't afford to live here. Some drivers had to put their house on the market, and others had hired attorneys. Luckily, just before the appeals hearing, they issued the licenses back. Those types of careless decisions have real impacts on people's lives. I'm proud to say that I'm well known in the community for someone of honesty, integrity, and professionalism, because I'll listen to individuals. The abandoned cars and the issues in code enforcement that are such a nuisance to us are important. I mean, we do have to prioritize those in the need of public safety. And they're very difficult in a world, in a great city that we have. We want to have the freedoms that we have here. And so we have to balance that out when we try to impose regulations on other people. And so I think that's important to realize when we train our code enforcement officers that there are ways to achieve compliance without having to necessarily use the big stick. I pride myself on my ability to do that, and there's ways to write that into legislation as well, so that we encourage communities to get involved and help each other. I think we need to encourage more public community involvement. When I was riding around the North Highland area, I did see some homes and houses that were in need of some help and some community involvement to fix the problem before we necessarily have to bring in King County government at $300 an hour and have them remove the car. So that's what I would look into, making legislation more responsible and responsive to the communities.
Thank you, Diana.
We need to make sure that reports are taken quickly and that we are responsive and getting to constituents, people throughout the community who have a code violation. To have a business in White Center be applying for a liquor license before we actually dug into it and learned how far behind they were in their property taxes, their fire code violations, and other issues is unacceptable and has been a public safety concern in White Center. Let's make sure that we are enforcing fire code to begin with. We're not waiting for things to get bad enough that we have police and sheriff incidents on the street with the crowds outside afterwards. We're going to need to do that with funding. We need to be able to increase staff and streamline services to make sure that we're doing that. And I will take my experience from Olympia, having served in budget committees in both houses of the legislature, to scrub budgets, to make priorities, and rest assured that code enforcement, and making sure that once the code enforcements are identified, that the prosecutor is backed up to be able to actually follow through. To merely have the code violation identified is not enough. We need to make sure that the enforcement behind it is ready as well. To scrub those budgets, make the priorities, and then make cuts, eliminate some programs, and actually enhance the ones that aren't meeting their current need, as we know code enforcement isn't, and you certainly know from living here in your community.
Thank you.